There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, their edges softened by familiarity, their weight hidden until long after they have passed. They are the quiet shifts in the foundation of your world, the hairline fractures that precede the earthquake. For me, that moment smelled of old books and the faint, clean scent of laundry detergent clinging to a worn sweatshirt. It was the pressure of a human head in my lap, a weight both impossibly heavy and lighter than air. It was the culmination of 1,000 small, unspoken things, all of it held within the space of a single, whispered sentence that was not a declaration of love, but something far more fragile, and perhaps far more profound. It was 3 in the morning, the city outside our apartment window having finally exhaled its last breath of noise, leaving only the hum of the refrigerator and the gentle rhythm of a sleeping man's breath. And he had just said it, his voice thick with sleep, a murmur against the denim of my jeans. "I trust you." And in the cathedral-like silence of our living room, those 3 words landed with the force of a covenant, a promise I hadn't known I was waiting for, and a burden I was terrified I would break. His name was Julian, and he was, for all intents and purposes, the sun to my shadow. We were a study in contrasts, a living Venn diagram where the overlap was a small, fiercely protected patch of ground we called friendship. I met him the way you meet so many pivotal people in your youth, by administrative accident. We were assigned as roommates in our second year of university, a pairing that seemed, on paper, to be a clerical error or a practical joke. I was Leo, a photography student who spent most of my time in the hushed, chemical-scented dark of the campus photo lab, or wandering the city's forgotten corners with a vintage camera, searching for beauty in decay. My side of the room was a curated landscape of stacked art books, prints tacked to the wall in various stages of critique, and the quiet order of a life lived mostly inside my own head. My world was one of frames and apertures, of waiting for the right light, of capturing stillness. Julian's world was a universe of explosive motion. He was a swimmer, one of the best in the country for his age, a disciplined force of nature who cleaved water with a grace that was brutal in its efficiency. His side of the room was a controlled chaos of damp towels that always smelled faintly of chlorine, textbooks piled like precarious architectural follies, and the gleaming gold of medals hanging from a corkboard. He moved through life with an unthinking confidence, a physical ease that I, in my quiet, observational stillness, could only ever marvel at. He was loud, not in an obnoxious way, but in a way that simply took up space, his laughter filling a room, his presence a tangible energy. He had a constellation of friends, a seemingly endless rotation of people who orbited his bright, easygoing gravity. And he had a girlfriend, Chloe, who was as bright and socially adept as he was, the perfect, matched set. For the first few months, we were polite satellites in a shared, small orbit. We operated on opposing schedules. He was gone before dawn, chasing the black line at the bottom of the pool, and I was often out late, chasing the fading light of dusk or working under the safe, red glow of the darkroom. Our interactions were a series of, "Hey, man, and did you eat the last of the milk?" We were roommates, not friends. The change came subtly, as all important changes do. It started with a question. I was matting a series of prints on the floor of our living room, stark black and white images of peeling paint on an abandoned factory. Julian came home, smelling of chlorine and exhaustion, and instead of heading straight for the shower, he stopped. He stood over my shoulder, silent for a long moment, water from his wet hair dripping onto the floorboards. I was acutely aware of his presence, the sheer physicality of him, the way he seemed to radiate heat. "What is it?" he asked, his voice softer than I was used to. I looked up, confused. "What is what?" "That," he said, pointing a finger at a print. It was a close-up of a shattered window pane, the remaining shards catching the light like jagged crystals. "What are you trying to show?" No one had ever asked me that before. People saw my photos and said, "That's cool," or "That's depressing." They saw the subject, not the intention. I found myself trying to explain it, to articulate the idea of finding structure in collapse, of the beauty in things that have been broken and left behind. I talked about light and shadow, about how the absence of something can define a space as much as its presence. I expected him to lose interest, to nod and walk away, but he didn't. He sank down to the floor, cross-legged, and listened. He listened with an intensity that I had previously only seen him direct at a coach or a starting block. He asked more questions, smart questions, about composition and focus. It was the first time I realized that behind the easygoing athlete, there was a mind that was curious and deep, a different kind of intelligence from my own, but no less formidable. That conversation opened a door. It was just a crack at first, but it was enough. He started asking to see my work when I brought it home. I started going to his swim meets. At first, I went out of a sense of obligation, but then I found myself fascinated. I brought my camera. I didn't shoot him the way the sports photographers did, all splash and triumphant emergence from the water. I shot the moments in between. The tension in his shoulders before he climbed onto the block, the abstracted patterns the water made around his moving form, the look of profound, solitary focus in his eyes behind his goggles. I was capturing the stillness inside his motion. When I showed him the prints, he was quiet for a long time. "You see me," he said, and it wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, of quiet astonishment. He saw my intention, I saw his. That was the bedrock of our friendship. And somewhere in the quiet spaces of that friendship, in the late-night conversations, in the shared silence of cohabitation, I fell in love with him. It was a hopeless, secret thing, a photograph I kept undeveloped in the darkroom of my own heart. He was Julian, the sun-drenched swimmer with the beautiful girlfriend and the life plan that was as straight and clearly marked as a lane in a swimming pool. I was his friend, the quiet, artistic roommate. I knew the boundaries. I built my life around them, constructing careful walls of platonic affection and determinately casual conversation. To want more was to risk the entire, beautiful, fragile structure of what we already had. It was a risk I was unwilling to take. So I watched him with Chloe, a knot of quiet envy tightening in my stomach, and I was the good friend. I listened to him talk about her, about their future, about a life that had no room for someone like me in the way I wanted. I learned to live with the ache. It became a familiar companion, a low hum beneath the surface of my days. I was the keeper of his quiet moments, the observer of his life, and I told myself that it had to be enough. For 2 years, it was. We moved from the dorm into a small, 2-bedroom apartment off campus. Our friendship solidified, becoming one of the core truths of my life. He was the person I showed my work to first. I was the person he came to when the pressure of his sport became too much. We understood each other's silences. I knew the particular slump of his shoulders that meant a bad practice, and he knew the specific kind of quiet that meant I was wrestling with a difficult concept for a project. It was a comfortable, established rhythm, a life built on the sturdy foundation of unspoken rules. He was straight. I was not. He was my best friend, and that was all it could ever be. I had accepted it, or, at least, I had told myself I had. But acceptance is a funny thing. It's not a fortress. It's more like a house of cards, beautiful and intricate, but vulnerable to the slightest tremor, the softest breath of change. The tremor came in his final year, during the National Collegiate Championships. It was the meet that was supposed to cement his future. Scouts were there. A professional career, Olympic trials. It was all laid out before him, a golden path. He was the favorite to win in his signature event, the 200-meter butterfly. He had been breaking records all season. There was no reason to believe he would do anything but succeed. I was there, in the stands, camera in my lap, feeling the nervous energy of the crowd hum through the concrete beneath my feet. I watched him climb the block, the familiar tension in his shoulders, the same focus I had captured on film 100 times. The starting pistol fired. He dove. And he lost. It wasn't a dramatic failure. He didn't falter or cramp up. He just wasn't the fastest. He was out-touched at the wall by 1/100th of a second. He came in second. To the roaring crowd, it was a thrilling finish. To the universe of professional swimming, It was the difference between a golden ticket and a pat on the back. I saw it on his face the moment he pulled his head from the water and looked at the scoreboard. It wasn't disappointment. It was devastation. It was the sound of a door slamming shut. The bright, confident energy that always surrounded him seemed to flicker and die, extinguished by a single, illuminated number. The sun had gone out. The aftermath was brutal in its quietness. Chloe was there, of course. She tried to comfort him with the tools she had. Bright, optimistic pronouncements, talk of after-parties, promises that it didn't matter. "You're still the best," she'd said, her voice loud in the stunned silence around the pool deck. I saw him flinch. He didn't want platitudes. He didn't want to be told it didn't matter, because it did. It was the only thing that mattered. I just stood back, my camera feeling like a lead weight in my hands. There was nothing to capture. There was only a void. He barely spoke on the long drive home. He just stared out the passenger window, the landscape blurring past, his reflection a pale, ghostly mask on the glass. That night began the shift. The foundation of our carefully constructed world began to crack. Chloe came over, bringing friends and beer, determined to cheer him up, to pull him out of the darkness by sheer force of will. But Julian wasn't there. He was a hollow shell, nodding and smiling faintly, his eyes 1,000 miles away. He eventually excused himself, saying he was tired, and disappeared into his room. The party fizzled out soon after. Chloe left, looking frustrated and confused, her brand of comfort having failed entirely. I cleaned up the empty bottles, the silence of the apartment feeling heavier than ever before. It was hours later, well after midnight, when I heard his bedroom door creak open. I was on the couch, reading, unable to sleep. He appeared in the doorway, a silhouette against the dim light of the hall. "Can't sleep," he mumbled. It was the first thing he'd said to me all evening. "Me neither," I said, closing my book. He hesitated, hovering in the doorway. It was the first time I had ever seen him look uncertain in our shared space. He had always moved through it as if he owned it. Now he looked like a guest, an intruder. He looked lost. Can I just sit out here for a bit?" "Of course," I said, shifting over to make room on the couch. He came and sat, not close, but on the opposite end, drawing his knees up to his chest and wrapping his arms around them. We sat in silence for what felt like an hour. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. I didn't offer words. I didn't tell him it would be okay or that it didn't matter. I knew he didn't need language. He needed presence. He needed a space where he didn't have to perform, not even happiness. He needed stillness. And stillness was my native tongue. Finally, his breath hitched, a small, choked sound in the darkness. Then another. He was crying. Not loudly, but with the silent, shuddering sobs of someone trying to hold the pieces of himself together. I did nothing. I just sat there, a fixed point in his collapsing universe, and let him break. I didn't touch him. I didn't speak. I just bore witness. That was the gift I could give him. The gift of an unjudging, undemanding silence. The breakup with Chloe happened a week later. It was inevitable. Their relationship was built for the sunshine. It had no tools for this kind of darkness. She wanted the old Julian back, the victor, the life of the party. But that Julian was gone, and the quiet, grieving man who remained was a stranger to her. Their final argument was quiet, tense, and happened behind his closed bedroom door. I heard the front door close, and a few minutes later, he emerged. He looked tired, but also, for the first time in a week, a little bit lighter. He walked into the kitchen, got a glass of water, and said, "Chloe and I are done." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it, though a treacherous, selfish part of me felt a flicker of something that wasn't sorrow at all. He just shook his head. "It's for the best. She doesn't get it." He looked at me, his eyes clear and direct. "You get it. You don't say anything. You just sit here. And it helps." And with that, the rules began to dissolve. The carefully drawn boundaries of our friendship, the lines I had so diligently policed, started to blur. His world had shrunk. His constellation of friends faded away, unsure how to deal with his grief. His sport, once his identity, was now a source of pain. His future, once a brightly lit highway, was now a dark, unmarked road. In that shrunken world, there was only our apartment. And in our apartment, there was only me. He began to orbit me, my quiet stillness, the way planets orbit a star, held by a gravity he didn't understand. And I, terrified and hopeful, let him. The ritual began on a Tuesday. It was born of exhaustion and insomnia, the twin ghosts that had haunted Julian since his loss. I found him again in the living room at 2 in the morning, staring at the blank television screen, his face illuminated by the pale, shifting light of a street lamp outside. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, swallowed by the oversized armchair. The confident posture of the athlete was gone, replaced by the weary slump of someone who had simply given up. His own bedroom, once his sanctuary, had become a prison, the walls closing in, the medals on his corkboard like little golden accusations. He told me he couldn't stand being in there, that the silence was too loud. "Can I just stay in here?" he asked, his voice rough. "I'll take the couch." "Don't be an idiot, Julian," I said, my voice softer than my words. "The couch is terrible. You'll be a wreck tomorrow." I hesitated, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. An idea surfaced, dangerous and tempting. I pushed it down. "No." But then I looked at his face, at the deep, bruised-looking circles under his eyes, and the careful walls I had built around my heart seemed insignificant in the face of his pain. You can take my room, if you want. I'll sleep out here." He shook his head immediately. "No, man. I'm not kicking you out of your own bed." He paused, and in that pause, a new, unspoken possibility hung in the air between us. It was fragile, easily shattered. He was the one who gave it voice, so tentatively I almost missed it. "Is there room? In your bed? I'll stay on the edge." I swear, my room was not large. My bed was a simple queen, pushed against one wall. There was technically room, but it was not the kind of room friends, not straight male friends, typically shared. It was an intimate geography, a space reserved for lovers. My mind raced, a frantic catalog of all the reasons this was a bad idea, a dangerous deviation from the established map of our friendship. But my mouth formed a different word. "Okay," I heard myself say. The single word hung in the silent apartment, feeling both enormous and utterly simple. He looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. He didn't say anything else. He just stood up and followed me down the short hallway to my room. My room was my sanctuary, a space that was wholly mine. It smelled of paper and developing chemicals and the specific scent of my own skin. Now, he was entering it not as a visitor, but as a participant. He walked in and stood awkwardly by the door as I pulled back the covers. I gestured to the side of the bed against the wall. He nodded, and with a hesitance that was so unlike him, he slipped under the covers, fully clothed in his sweatpants and t-shirt. He turned his back to me immediately, pressing himself against the cool plaster of the wall, making himself as small as possible. I switched off the light and got into my own side, the distance between our bodies feeling like a vast, charged canyon. I lay on my back, staring up at the ceiling, hyper-aware of every sound, the rustle of the sheets as he shifted, the soft cadence of his breathing. I did not sleep. I listened as, over the course of an hour, his breathing slowly deepened, evening out into the steady rhythm of sleep. He was finally resting, and that, I told myself, was all that mattered. That night was the first. It was meant to be a one-time thing, an anomaly born of a crisis. But the next night, after a long, quiet dinner of takeout, he looked at me, a question in his eyes. He didn't even have to ask. I just nodded. And so the ritual began. Every night, he would come to my room. He was always careful, always respectful of the space. He would take his side against the wall, turn his back, and maintain the invisible boundary that ran down the center of the mattress. And I would lie on my side, feigning sleep, my body humming with a low-grade current of hope and fear. I was living inside a photograph I was afraid to develop, terrified that bringing it into the light would reveal it to be overexposed, a ruined, ghostly image of what I wanted it to be. Slowly, incrementally, the geography of the bed began to change. The shifts were seismic in their smallness. It started with a nightmare. I was woken by a sudden, sharp gasp beside me. I sat up. Julian was twisted in the sheets, his whole body tense, muttering something incoherent. I reached out, my hand hovering over his shoulder, hesitating. It felt like crossing a border into a foreign country without a passport. "Julian," I whispered. "Hey, wake up." My hand finally made contact, resting on the warm cotton of his t-shirt. He jolted, his eyes flying open, wide and panicked in the dim light filtering through the window. He stared at me, disoriented, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "It's okay," I said softly. "You're okay. You're here." He blinked, the panic slowly receding from his eyes as he recognized me, recognized the room. "Leo," he breathed, his voice shaky. He didn't move away from my touch. If anything, he seemed to lean into it, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. My hand was still on his shoulder. I should have moved it. I didn't. He took another shaky breath, and then, without a word, he rolled onto his side to face me. He was close now, the canyon between us reduced to a mere few inches. He closed his eyes, but he didn't turn away. My hand was still there, a point of anchor in the darkness. After a few minutes, his breathing evened out again. I finally, slowly, retracted my hand, my skin tingling where it had touched him. I lay there for the rest of the night, my heart a wild, frantic bird in my chest, listening to him breathe in the new, closer darkness. The boundary, once breached, became more permeable. He no longer pressed himself against the wall. He slept facing my side of the bed. The space between us shrank from inches to nothing. It happened by accident at first, a foot brushing mine, a hand thrown out in sleep that landed on my arm. Each accidental touch was a lightning strike, sending a jolt through my entire system. I would freeze, waiting for him to pull back, to apologize, to re-establish the line. But he never did. He would just murmur in his sleep and settle closer. And so, what began as accidental became deliberate, though it was a deliberation cloaked in the plausible deniability of sleep and comfort. One night, it was colder than usual, the old apartment building's heating struggling against an unseasonable autumn chill. We were lying in our usual positions, back to back, a thin sliver of cold air between us. I heard him shiver, a small, involuntary tremor. Then, his voice, a quiet whisper in the dark. "Leo?" "Yeah." My voice was thick with sleep I was only pretending to feel. "I'm so cold." It was not a request, but it was an offering. It was a door left ajar. I could have gotten up and found another blanket. That would have been the sensible, safe thing to do. It would have preserved the fiction we were living in. Instead, I hesitated for a single, heart-stopping beat, and then I turned over. I moved toward him, into his space. "Here," I whispered, and I wrapped an arm around his middle, pulling him back against my chest. His body was tense for a second, a rigid line of surprise. I thought, I've made a mistake. I've crossed the line. He's going to pull away. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, panicked rhythm. I was about to let go, to retreat back to my side of the bed and the safety of our unspoken rules. But then he exhaled. It was a long, slow breath, and his entire body seemed to melt against mine. He settled into the curve of my body as if he were made for it. He was warm, solid, real. I could feel the steady beat of his heart through his back. I rested my chin on the top of his head, smelling the clean, familiar scent of his shampoo. He was completely still, but it was not the stillness of tension. It was the stillness of surrender, of peace. And that became the new ritual. Cuddling. It was a word that felt too cute, too casual for the profound, terrifying intimacy of what we were doing. Every night, I would hold him. We never spoke of it in the morning. In the daylight, we were roommates again. We made coffee, talked about classes, complained about the leaky faucet. But at night, in the darkness of my room, we existed in a different world, a world of silent, physical comfort, a world where the lines were not just blurred, but erased entirely. My secret love for him was no longer a quiet, manageable ache. It was a roaring fire, fed every night by his proximity, his warmth, the feeling of his body trusting mine. I was living a half-life, a dream I was terrified of waking from. I existed in a state of suspended animation, caught between the agonizing hope that this meant what I wanted it to mean, and the paralyzing fear that for him, this was nothing more than a human hot water bottle, a temporary cure for loneliness and grief. I was a tool for his healing, and I was letting him use me, because the selfish, desperate part of me would rather be used than be nothing to him at all. I began to see our nights together through the lens of my own work. It was like developing a photograph in the darkroom. I was submerged in the chemical bath of our intimacy, watching an image slowly emerge, faint and uncertain. I could see the outlines of something, the shape of a new reality, but it was still too ghostly to be sure. I was terrified of turning on the lights too soon, of exposing the fragile image to the harsh glare of reality and finding that there was nothing there at all, or worse, that I had ruined it in my eagerness. So I waited in the dark, my hands trembling, nurturing this fragile, emerging thing, praying it was real. The nights took on a texture, a language of their own. I learned the map of his body, the way a muscle in his back would twitch when he was stressed, the exact spot behind his ear that was impossibly soft. I learned the different rhythms of his breathing, the shallow breaths of anxiety giving way to the deep, slow tides of sleep as he settled against me. He, in turn, learned the contours of my own quiet. He would reach for my hand in the darkness, his fingers lacing through mine, a simple, declarative gesture that said more than any words could. Sometimes, I would wake in the middle of the night to find him watching me, his eyes dark and unreadable in the moonlight. He would never speak in those moments. He would just watch, his expression a mixture of tenderness and a deep, soul-shaking confusion that I recognized because I felt it too. This period of our lives was a strange, suspended reality. It was a room without doors or windows, a space we had built together out of grief and loneliness and a desperate, unspoken need. But rooms like that cannot exist forever. Eventually, someone has to try the handle of a door. Someone has to risk letting the light in. The tension was becoming unbearable, a string pulled so taut it had to either snap or begin to play a new song. I felt myself approaching a breaking point. The duality of our lives, platonic friends by day, intimately entangled by night, was beginning to tear me apart. I needed to know. I needed to risk the beautiful, terrible darkness of the darkroom and see what image had truly formed. The moment of crossing came on a rainy Thursday night. The sound of the rain against the window pane was a gentle, constant rhythm, a soothing percussion that seemed to amplify the quiet intimacy of the room. We were in bed, lying face to face, the space between us almost non-existent. For once, neither of us was pretending to be asleep. Our eyes were open, locked on each other in the dim, gray light. The air was thick with everything we hadn't said for months. It was a silence so dense it felt like a physical presence in the room. I could see the pulse beating in his throat, a frantic, living thing. My own heart was a matched rhythm. He was the one who broke the silence, his voice a raw whisper that was barely audible over the rain. Leo, my name on his lips sounded different. It sounded like a question, a plea. I could only manage a faint hum in response, afraid my voice would betray the storm of emotion inside me. He didn't speak for a long moment. He just looked at me, his gaze searching my face as if trying to read a difficult text. I could see the war in his eyes, the conflict between a lifetime of assumptions and the undeniable reality of the man lying in front of him. I saw fear, but underneath the fear, I saw a flicker of something else, a desperate, fragile hope. Then he spoke again, his whisper even softer, more hesitant. Would it be okay? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The question hung in the air between us, shimmering and terrifying and beautiful. Would it be okay if I broke the last rule? Would it be okay if I admitted that this is more than comfort? Would it be okay if I kiss you? My entire world, the carefully constructed edifice of our friendship, the secret, painful architecture of my love for him, all of it balanced on the point of my answer. I could have said no. I could have pretended not to understand. I could have made a joke, deflected, and retreated to the safety of the status quo. It would have been the sensible thing to do. It would have saved us both from the potential wreckage. But I was so tired of being sensible. I was tired of living in the dark. I didn't speak. I just nodded. A small, almost imperceptible movement. But it was enough. He closed the last inch of space between us. His lips met mine with a hesitance that was heart-stopping. It was not a kiss of passion or demand. It was a question. It was a confession. It was soft and tentative and searching. It was the kiss of a man who was lost and scared and was trying to find his way home. I felt the wetness of a tear slide from the corner of his eye onto my cheek, mingling with the rain on the window pane. I brought my hand up to his face, my thumb stroking his jaw, and I kissed him back. I kissed him with all the months of unspoken yearning, all the nights of silent hope, all the terror and the tenderness. I poured all of it into that one, gentle, world-altering press of our lips. When we finally broke apart, we just lay there, our foreheads pressed together, breathing the same air. The string had not snapped. It had begun to play a new and terrifyingly beautiful song. In the quiet of the room, with the rain still falling outside, I felt the fragile image in the darkroom finally fix itself into something real, something permanent, something I could hold. The morning after was a study in silence, but it was a different kind of silence. It was not the comfortable, easy silence of our established friendship, nor the charged, intimate silence of our nights. It was a brittle, anxious silence, thin as ice over deep water. When I woke up, his side of the bed was empty and cold. It wasn't unusual for him to be up first, but usually I would hear him moving around in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of the coffee maker gurgling to life. This morning, there was nothing. The apartment was unnervingly still. I got out of bed, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I found him in the living room, fully dressed, staring out the window at the rain-slicked street. He didn't turn when I entered. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Hey," he replied, his voice flat, his gaze fixed on something outside. I walked over to the kitchen and started making coffee, the routine motions a flimsy shield against the thick, uncomfortable tension in the air. The Julian who had kissed me last night, the vulnerable, searching man who had cried in my arms, was gone. In his place was a stranger, a man encased in a shell of rigid formality. He was building walls, and I could feel myself on the outside of them, shivering in the cold. I poured 2 mugs of coffee and walked back into the living room, holding one out to him. He finally turned from the window, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He took the mug, his fingers brushing mine for a fraction of a second, and he flinched, pulling his hand back as if he'd been burned. That small, reflexive movement was more painful than a slap. It was a negation of everything that had happened between us. It was a denial. "Julian," I started, but I didn't know how to finish. "What are we? What was that? Are you okay?" The questions were a frantic chorus in my head, but none of them seemed right. "I have to go," he said abruptly, placing the untouched mug of coffee on the windowsill. "I have a thing. With the team." It was a lie. I knew his schedule as well as my own. There was no team meeting on a Friday morning. He was running. He was running from me, from the kiss, from the terrifying reality of what had happened in the dark. He grabbed his keys from the bowl by the door and was gone before I could say another word. The front door clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing in the silent apartment like a final verdict. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door, the warmth of the coffee mug in my hands slowly turning cold. The beautiful, permanent image I thought had been fixed last night was dissolving before my eyes, the chemicals of fear and denial washing it away until there was nothing left but a blank, white sheet. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. It was like living with a ghost. Julian was there, physically, but he was absent in every way that mattered. He began to operate on the periphery of our shared life, coming home late, leaving early. He avoided being in the same room with me. The easy conversation, the shared meals, the comfortable silences, they all vanished, replaced by a strained, painful politeness. He started sleeping in his own room again. The door, which had been left open for months as a silent invitation, was now firmly, unequivocally closed. Each night, I would lie alone in my bed, the empty space beside me feeling like a wound, and I would stare at my own closed door, listening for the sound of his, knowing it would not open. I was drowning in confusion and hurt. I replayed the kiss, the months leading up to it, over and over in my mind, a photographer obsessively examining a negative for flaws. Had I misread everything? Had I seen what I wanted to see, projecting my own feelings onto his grief and loneliness? Had I taken advantage of his vulnerability? The thought was a shard of ice in my gut. The tenderness of that moment, the thing that had felt so real and mutual, now seemed like a grotesque distortion. Maybe he had kissed me in a moment of confusion, and the harsh light of morning had brought only regret and disgust. The pain of his rejection was sharp, but the pain of thinking I had hurt him, that I had broken his trust, the very trust he had named in a sleepy murmur weeks ago, was unbearable. The phrase echoed in my mind. I trust you. Had I betrayed that? After a week of this Cold War, I couldn't take it anymore. The silence was more damaging than any argument could be. It was allowing my worst fears to grow, unchecked, in the dark. I was losing him, not just as a potential lover, but as my friend. The friendship was the foundation, and it was crumbling to dust beneath my feet. I decided I had to break the silence. I had to risk the final, total collapse of everything for the slim chance of understanding. I waited for him one evening. I heard his key in the lock, and I stood up from the couch, my heart pounding a sick, anxious rhythm against my ribs. He walked in, saw me standing there, and immediately his eyes darted toward the hallway, looking for an escape route. "Don't," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Don't run away. Please." He froze, his hands still on the doorknob, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He looked exhausted. He finally let the door close and leaned his back against it, not looking at me. "Julian, talk to me," I pleaded, taking a step toward him. "Please, just tell me what's going on. If I did something wrong, if I misread, if I hurt you, you have to tell me. This silence is killing me." He let out a long, shaky breath and scrubbed a hand over his face. He still wouldn't look at me. "You didn't do anything wrong, Leo," he said, his voice muffled by his hand. "Then what is this?" I asked, my voice cracking with frustration and hurt. "Why are you treating me like a stranger? Why are you hiding from me? One night, you're kissing me, and the next, you can't even look at me. What happened?" He was silent for a long moment, his head bowed. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, agonized whisper. "I don't know. That's not an answer," I said, my patience fraying. "It's the only one I have," he snapped, his head jerking up, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were filled with a raw, panicked desperation. "I don't know, okay? I don't know what happened. I don't know what that was. I don't know what I'm doing." He pushed himself off the door and started pacing the small living room, his movements agitated, trapped. "My whole life, Leo, my whole life has been a straight line. It was swim, school, Chloe, nationals, pros. It was all laid out. And then I lost. The line just disappeared. It's gone. And I was lost. I was drowning. And the only thing that felt solid, the only thing that felt real, was you." He stopped pacing and faced me, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Being with you, in your room, it was the only time I felt safe. The only time the noise in my head stopped. I could breathe. And I needed it. I needed you. And I didn't understand why. I just told myself it was because you're my best friend. That's all. It had to be all." He took a deep, shuddering breath. But then it started to feel like more. And it scared the hell out of me. And I just kept pushing it down, telling myself I was just confused. I was grieving. But that night, when I kissed you, he shook his head, looking away again. It didn't feel confusing. It felt right. It felt like the most honest thing I've done in my entire life. And that is what is terrifying me. Because I don't know what it means. Who am I if that felt right? What does that make me? Everything I thought I knew about myself, about my life, it's wrong. His confession hung in the air between us, a raw, painful, and profoundly vulnerable thing. The anger and hurt I had been feeling dissolved, replaced by a wave of overwhelming empathy. He wasn't rejecting me. He was rejecting a terrifying new version of himself. He wasn't running from me. He was running from the feelings I unlocked in him. He hadn't been disgusted by the kiss. He had been terrified by how much he had wanted it. The walls he had built weren't to keep me out. They were to keep his own confusing, frightening feelings in. I closed the distance between us, standing in front of him. He was still looking at the floor, his whole body radiating a tense, coiled misery. I reached out, not to hold him, but to gently place my hand on his arm. He flinched again, but this time, he didn't pull away. "Hey," I said softly. "Look at me." Slowly, he lifted his head. His eyes were swimming with unshed tears. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now," I said, my voice steady. "You don't have to label it. You don't have to know what it all means for the rest of your life. All you have to do is stop running from it." From me, I took a breath. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. But I can't do this half-life, Julian. I can't be your dirty little secret, not even from yourself. I can't pretend that kiss didn't happen. It did. And it felt right to me, too." My voice dropped to a whisper. "It has for a very long time." A single tear finally escaped and traced a path down his cheek. "I'm so scared, Leo," he whispered. "I'm scared of what this means. I'm scared of losing you. You're the only person I have left. You're not going to lose me," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "But you might if you keep hiding. The only thing that can break us is this silence. This fear." I moved my hand from his arm to his cheek, my thumb gently wiping away his tear. His skin was warm. He closed his eyes, leaning into my touch, a mirror of the moment in bed after his nightmare. It was a surrender. "We can be scared together," I whispered. He opened his eyes, and the panic was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness, but also a flicker of something else. Acceptance. He gave a small, shaky nod. He didn't have the answers. Neither have I. But in that moment, we had honesty. And we had each other. The confrontation hadn't provided a neat resolution, but it had lanced the wound. It had let the poison out. We had stopped pretending. And in the quiet, shared vulnerability of that moment, standing in the middle of our living room, the slow, painful process of healing could finally, truly begin. The conversation was not a magic wand. It didn't erase Julian's fear or confusion overnight, but it dismantled the walls between us. The aftermath was a period of careful, tentative rebuilding. We started talking, really talking, not just about classes or the weather, but about him, about his feelings, about the wreckage of his old life and the terrifying, uncharted territory of his new one. We would sit on the couch for hours, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in a silence that was once again comfortable, companionable. He talked about the pressure he had been under his whole life, the identity that had been built for him, the athlete, the champion, and how hollow it felt now. He admitted that his relationship with Chloe had been more about fulfilling a role than about a deep connection. He was excavating the ruins of his own life, and I was there, not as a photographer documenting the decay, but as a partner, helping him sift through the rubble and look for anything worth saving. He still slept in his own room. The closed door was no longer a symbol of rejection, but one of respect. It was a boundary he needed to draw for himself as he tried to understand his own mind, and I understood that. But the intimacy between us didn't disappear. It just changed form. It moved from the unspoken physical comfort of the night into the deliberate, spoken honesty of the day. One evening, we were cooking dinner together, a simple pasta dish, moving around each other in the small kitchen with the easy, synchronized grace of long practice. He was quiet, stirring the sauce, his brow furrowed in thought. "You know," he said suddenly, not looking up from the pot, "when I lost that race, I felt like my life was over. Like the person I was supposed to be had just died on the spot." He paused and finally looked at me. And I think maybe he did. And maybe that's not a bad thing. It was a monumental admission, a recognition that the end of his old life might be the necessary beginning of a new, more authentic one. I just nodded, my heart swelling with a fierce, protective pride for this man who was so bravely navigating his own reinvention. The healing was slow, nonlinear. There were good days, filled with laughter and a rediscovered ease between us. And there were bad days, when he would retreat into a quiet, pensive shell, wrestling with the ghosts of his former self. On those days, I learned to give him space, to trust that he would come back to me when he was ready. And he always did. The physical intimacy returned, but it did so slowly and with intention. It started with small things. A hand on my back as he passed me in the hallway. His leg pressed against mine on the couch as we watched a movie. These were not the ambiguous, deniable gestures of before. They were small, conscious choices. Declarations. One night, we were on the couch, and he was tired, the strain of his emotional excavation showing on his face. He leaned his head against my shoulder. He didn't say anything, but his whole body sighed, a release of tension. I rested my head against his, and we sat like that for a long time, the television playing to an empty room. It was different from the nights in bed. There was no pretext of sleep or cold. There was just a shared, acknowledged need for closeness. Weeks turned into a month, then two. The seasons changed outside our window. Autumn bled into the stark, quiet beauty of winter. The apartment became our entire world, a safe harbor where we were figuring out this new language between us. The final piece clicked into place on a cold December night. A light snow was falling, muffling the city in a blanket of white. We had spent the evening in, decorating a small, sad-looking Christmas tree we'd bought from a lot down the street. We were laughing, untangling lights, drinking cheap wine. It felt normal. It felt happy. Later that night, I was in my room, reading. He knocked softly on my door, which was slightly ajar. Not closed, but not wide open either. A symbol of our new, negotiated space. "Hey," he said from the doorway. "Hey," I replied, putting my book down. He came in and just stood there for a moment, looking at the bed, then at me. The air was still, but it wasn't tense. It was calm, expectant. "Can I stay here tonight?" he asked. His voice was quiet, steady. There was no desperation in it, no grief. It was just a simple, honest question. "Of course," I said. He walked over to the bed, and this time, he didn't hesitate. He pulled back the covers on his side, the side against the wall, which was, and always would be, his side, and slipped in. I turned off the light and got in beside him. We lay in the dark, side by side, not touching. The silence stretched, but it was a peaceful silence, filled with a quiet understanding. Then, I felt his hand search for mine under the covers. His fingers found mine and laced through them, his grip firm, sure. He rolled onto his side to face me. I could just make out the shape of his face in the dark. "Leo," he whispered. "Julian," I whispered back. And then he kissed me. It was not the hesitant, questioning kiss of that rainy night. It was not the desperate, confused kiss of a man at his breaking point. It was a kiss of arrival. It was soft, and it was sure. It was a kiss that said, "I'm here. I'm not running anymore. This is real. We are real." When he pulled back, he didn't press his forehead to mine. He just settled his head on my chest, right over my heart, and slung his arm across my waist, pulling himself close. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him tight. His breathing was already evening out, the slow, deep rhythm of a man who was finally, truly at peace. He was home. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together. The quiet peace of finding a safe harbor is not about the absence of storms, but about the certainty of an anchor in the midst of them. For us, that anchor was not a grand declaration or a perfectly defined future, but the simple, profound truth of a hand reached for in the dark, the shared warmth in a quiet room, and the silent understanding that we were, at last, building a new life, together, on a foundation of our own making. We had found our way not to a straight, pre-drawn line, but to a path we could walk side by side, wherever it might lead. And for the first time, the future didn't feel like a dark, unmarked road, but like an open field, waiting for us to explore it, our hands intertwined. The photograph was no longer a fragile image in a darkroom. It was a living, breathing thing, vibrant and real in the gentle light of a new day.